The lights of the studio blazed like a theater stage, every camera fixed on the two figures at the center of America's attention. The air was thick, charged with the kind of tension that only comes when millions of people lean closer to their screens, waiting for the next word. This wasn't just a debate, it was a showdown, the kind of moment that would be clipped, replayed, dissected, and remembered long after the last microphone went silent. Donald Trump leaned forward, his voice booming, his hands slicing the air as he delivered the insult. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't clever, it was crude, sharp, and designed with a single purpose: to cut down Jasmine Crockett. He called her unqualified, sneered about her appearance, tossed in a jab about her district, the kind of sweeping dismissal meant to turn the crowd against her and remind everyone of his dominance. The insult landed like a slap. A ripple of gasps tore through the audience. Some froze in disbelief. Others exchanged nervous laughs, as if unsure how to process the audacity of it. The moderators shifted in their seats. Cameramen instinctively zoomed in, searching for Crockett's reaction. And there she was, framed in the glow of the spotlight, her face calm, almost serene. No flinch, no flash of anger. Just stillness, the kind that carried more power than shouting ever could. Her eyes didn't dart away, didn't crumble under the weight of the insult. Instead, they locked on Trump with a quiet intensity that said more than words could. Across from her, Trump's lips curled into a self-satisfied grin, convinced he'd scored his blow, that this would be the moment played on highlight reels to showcase his bravado. But his grin met silence. The crowd waited. The moderators waited. The nation waited. And Crockett simply held her ground. Her calm stood in stark contrast to his bluster, a living reminder that dignity can often be louder than arrogance. Viewers, at home, shifted forward on their couches, hungry for her response, sensing that the stage had just been set for something bigger than a typical exchange of barbs, that this was not just a sparring match between two politicians. To see Donald Trump lob another insult across the stage was nothing new. He had built his brand on it. For years, his political theater had revolved around belittlement, around turning opponents into caricatures, reducing serious figures into punchlines. He had mocked war heroes, derided immigrants, demeaned women with language meant to bruise. It was his signature move: dominate through humiliation, entertain through cruelty. And yet, on this night, in this moment, the insult aimed at Jasmine Crockett carried more weight than the others before it, because Crockett was not just another opponent on stage. She was a young black congresswoman, an attorney, a woman who had fought her way into the halls of power through grit and relentless determination. Every jab at her wasn't merely personal, it was layered with centuries of echoes. The old playbook of dismissing women of color as unqualified, angry, or out of their place. The insult Trump hurled was not isolated. It belonged to a long lineage of dismissal that countless Americans recognized instantly, and that recognition mattered. For the millions watching at home, Crockett's silence in that split second after the insult wasn't just strategy, it was symbolic. It represented the patience of those who had endured mockery, the composure of those told to wait their turn, the restraint of those constantly challenged to prove their worth twice over. In that stillness, viewers saw something larger than politics. They saw dignity on trial. Trump's history made the stakes even higher. He had belittled Hillary Clinton on debate stages, mocked Carly Fiorina's looks, interrupted Kamala Harris with a smirk that dripped condescension. His attacks were often laced with misogyny, his confidence fed by the laughter of those who saw cruelty as strength. To him, this was just another line in his script. But to Crockett and to those watching her, this was a test of something far deeper. Her response would not just be about defending herself. It would be about answering a pattern, about showing that the old tactics of domination and dismissal could be met, not with anger that played into stereotypes, but with a kind of power that unsettled arrogance at its core. The studio audience seemed to feel it too. Their gasp wasn't just about shock, it was about recognition. They had heard words like these before. They had seen the play before. What they hadn't seen, at least not often enough, was what could happen when someone turned the script upside down. And Crockett was ready to do just that, because this moment, small as it might have seemed to those looking only for entertainment, was about to become a lightning rod. Her response would ripple beyond the studio. It would be clipped for TikTok, dissected on Twitter, replayed on morning talk shows. It would matter not only because of what she said, but because of who she was when she said it and what she represented for millions who had long been told to shrink under the weight of insults. The cameras stayed locked. The moderators kept quiet. Even Trump, for all his bravado, leaned back slightly, waiting to see whether his insult would land the way his insults always had. To understand the weight of Trump's insult against Jasmine Crockett, one has to step back and look at the playbook he has run for decades. Donald Trump's political persona was never about policy mastery or nuanced debate. It was about spectacle, about showmanship, about bending the narrative so that he became the star, even if the stage wasn't his to begin with. And central to that playbook was the insult. From the very moment he descended the golden escalator in 2015 and launched his campaign with language designed to shock, Trump realized something crucial. Outrage was currency. Mocking his opponents, belittling reporters, branding rivals with nicknames that stuck, Crooked Hillary, Little Marco, Sleepy Joe, these weren't slips of the tongue. They were carefully calibrated weapons, a strategy to control the conversation and paint every opponent as smaller, weaker, undeserving. On debate stages, it was even more pronounced. When the lights came on and the cameras rolled, Trump transformed into a kind of reality TV antagonist, the villain that audiences loved to hate but couldn't stop watching. He rarely offered policy depth. Instead, he made the event about dominance. He interrupted, talked over moderators, tossed barbs that left others sputtering in disbelief. And while his rivals played by the rules of traditional decorum, Trump rewrote them, turning debates into theater and insults into headlines. But beneath the bluster, contradictions festered. He branded himself as a champion of the working class, yet his gilded towers and billionaire lifestyle stood in stark contrast to the struggles of ordinary Americans. He spoke of law and order while his own administration was riddled with indictments, scandals, and investigations. He projected strength but often targeted the most vulnerable: immigrants, women, marginalized groups, as if punching down were the ultimate proof of power. His entire persona was stitched together by contradictions. But they were contradictions he managed to disguise with sheer force of performance. That's why insults worked so well for him. They weren't about facts. They were about dominance. They created a spectacle that overshadowed subsistence, leaving his opponents scrambling to answer cruelty with logic, a mismatch from the start. And for years, it worked. Crowds cheered. Headlines rolled in. Rivals faltered under the weight of mockery. There were countless examples. When he mocked John McCain for being a prisoner of war, saying he liked people who weren't captured, the nation gasped, but his base applauded. When he dismissed Carly Fiorina's face during a campaign stop, look at that face. Would anyone vote for that? He turned misogyny into a punchline. When he loomed behind Hillary Clinton during a 2016 debate, pacing and hovering like a predator, the image became seared into the public's mind. Trump as the dominant force, Clinton as the target of spectacle. It wasn't just opponents either. Reporters, critics, even members of his own party found themselves in the crosshairs. He called women nasty, belittled entire countries with a crude sneer, and labeled journalists as the enemy of the people. Each insult was another notch in his belt, another headline that proved he could bend the world's attention toward himself. And yet, this reliance on bullying and showmanship was always precarious. It demanded an audience willing to laugh, to cheer, to buy into the performance. Without applause, without the validation of reaction, the insults lost their power. They revealed themselves for what they were, tools of insecurity dressed up as strength. That's why this night mattered. On the surface, Trump had reached for his old weapon, a cutting insult aimed to demean Jasmine Crockett. He expected the same formula to play out: shock, laughter, a rattled opponent scrambling to recover while he basked in the glow of control. But Crockett didn't play the role he assigned her. She didn't sputter, didn't lash out, didn't wilt under the weight of his performance. And in that silence, something shifted. The cameras, usually accomplices to his theater, lingered instead on her calm, her composure, her refusal to be dragged into his game. The audience, accustomed to groans or awkward chuckles, sat in suspended anticipation. For once, Trump's insult didn't define the moment. It exposed him. Because in this clash, his addiction to control, his reliance on insult as dominance, his years of theatrics, all collided with something he wasn't prepared for. An opponent who understood that dignity could dismantle arrogance more effectively than any insult ever could. And for the first time in a long time, the old tactics that had carried him so far began to show their cracks. But this time, his usual tactics backfired spectacularly. Long before she stood on a stage across from Donald Trump, Jasmine Crockett had been fighting battles that demanded more than quick wit or sharp words. She was born into a world that did not hand her power, but rather tested her resolve at every turn. Raised in a working-class family, she carried the weight of expectation and struggle on her shoulders from an early age. Her parents taught her that nothing worth having comes easy, and that dignity, once compromised, is nearly impossible to reclaim. Those lessons became the steel in her spine, the compass guiding her through every step of her journey. She excelled in school, not because doors opened automatically, but because she pushed them open herself. College was a grind of long nights and part-time jobs, balancing ambition with responsibility. Then came law school, a crucible where she faced professors and classmates who underestimated her, who assumed she was less capable because of her race, her gender, or simply because she didn't fit their image of a future attorney. Each slight, each dismissive comment built a kind of quiet defiance within her. She didn't just want to succeed, she wanted to prove that resilience could be as powerful as privilege. When she became an attorney, Crockett chose a path many avoid: criminal defense. She stood beside those society often discarded, fighting for the voiceless in courtrooms where bias ran thick. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was necessary. She saw firsthand how justice bent under pressure, how the powerful wielded systems against the powerless. And in those tense moments, arguing cases that could decide the course of a person's life, she learned the art of composure. Judges could bark, prosecutors could posture, but Crockett discovered that calm persistence delivered with precision could cut deeper than shouting ever would. Her career didn't stall there. She became known as more than just a lawyer. She became an advocate. When police brutality cases drew national attention, when voting rights were threatened, when communities cried out for representation, Crockett was there. She didn't shy away from the microphone, nor did she cower before those who tried to silence her. Each public appearance, each speech, layered her reputation, fiery but controlled, unshakable, even under fire. And she wasn't afraid of confrontation. In hearings on Capitol Hill, she gained a reputation for sharp comebacks that sliced through hypocrisy. She could pivot from legal precision to biting wit in seconds, exposing the weakness of those who underestimated her. Clips of her take circulated online, earning her admiration from progressives who saw in her a reflection of their own frustrations and their own hopes. People whispered that she was fearless, but Crockett herself knew the truth. She felt fear, of course. She just refused to let it dictate her choices. Behind the public persona was a woman who had endured personal struggles as well. Like so many women of color, she bore the weight of constant scrutiny. Every mistake threatened to be magnified, every misstep framed as proof of stereotypes. She carried the exhaustion of needing to be twice as prepared, twice as polished, twice as strong, just to stand on the same ground as others. There were moments of doubt, moments where the climb seemed impossible. But each time she stumbled, she reminded herself of the communities she represented, of the young girls watching her path. She could not afford to crumble. It was those struggles that forged her resilience, that gave her a different kind of strength, not the loud, performative strength of bluster, but the enduring strength of someone who has been tested and has never broken. In that way, she was the perfect counterbalance to Trump. Where he thrived on chaos, she embodied composure. Where he sought dominance through insult, she commanded respect through dignity. He wielded arrogance like a sword. She carried truth like a shield. And that contrast mattered, because audiences, whether in courtrooms or on debate stages, can sense authenticity. They can tell when someone is posturing and when someone has earned their presence through lived struggle. Crockett's authenticity was her superpower. Wasn't manufactured. It was born of years of being underestimated, of pushing through doors meant to stay shut, of speaking up when silence would have been safer. So when she walked onto that debate stage, she did not see herself as a victim, waiting for insults. She saw herself as the embodiment of resilience and the living proof that dignity could stand tall against arrogance. Every trial, every late night, every courtroom battle had been preparing her for a moment like this. The insult hung in the air like smoke, refusing to dissipate. For a long moment, the silence felt heavier than the words themselves, as if everyone in the studio and everyone watching from living rooms across the nation was holding their breath. Then, predictably, Trump pressed his advantage. He leaned forward, his voice rising, filling the hall with the bravado that had become his signature. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," he sneered, wagging a finger in Crockett's direction. "I've built businesses, I've run the country, and she's just another nobody from nowhere. Believe me, folks, this is what they send you. It's embarrassing." The audience stirred. Some gasped at the bluntness, others chuckled nervously, while a pocket of Trump supporters in the crowd clapped with eager approval. The moderators shuffled their notes, trying to rein him in, but Trump plowed ahead, uninterested in rules or time limits. His words came faster, louder, tumbling over one another in a show of dominance. And yet, through it all, Jasmine Crockett sat steady. She did not roll her eyes, did not bite her lip, did not let even the smallest flicker of agitation cross her face. Her stillness was its own kind of power. She waited, hands folded, gaze unbroken, as though she knew that every second Trump spent shouting was a second he revealed more about himself than about her. But Trump mistook her calm for weakness. He grew bolder, his insults sharper, his tone dripping with disdain. He interrupted others on the stage, but always circled back to her. "She's clueless," he barked. "Doesn't understand business, doesn't understand politics, doesn't understand America." Each line seemed rehearsed, like a man replaying his greatest hits, convinced they would land just as hard as they once had. The murmurs in the audience began to shift. What had started as laughter turned uneasy. Some exchanged glances, wondering how long this barrage would last. Others whispered, sensing the imbalance, the spectacle of a former president, red-faced and snarling, hammering relentlessly at a calm congresswoman who refused to be baited. Still, Crockett remained unmoved. If anything, her composure grew more striking with every insult hurled her way. She took notes as he spoke, as if cataloging each line, not for defense, but for dismantling. Her patience wasn't passivity, it was strategy. She let him build the wall of his own arrogance, brick by brick, waiting for the precise moment to topple it with a single blow, and Trump, too caught up in his own performance, couldn't see it. He mistook the shifting mood of the audience as proof of his dominance, when in truth it was a prelude to something else, anticipation. The room wasn't laughing with him anymore. It was bracing for her. The energy rose like a storm. Trump's voice thundered, drowning out the moderators, crowding out his fellow debaters. He jabbed at the air, his face flushed, his words spiraling into repetition. Weak, unqualified, dangerous, he spat, his cadence almost desperate now, and still. Crockett sat, she waited. The camera framed her face, serene and unyielding, the eye of the hurricane. The tension between them stretched so tight that even the viewers at home could feel it. Something had to break. The crowd sensed it, the nation sensed it. This wasn't going to end with silence. The studio lights seemed to sharpen, the air charged, like static before a lightning strike. 4 minutes, Trump had filled the room with his thunder, but the silence that followed was deafening. All eyes fixed on Jasmine Crockett. She leaned forward at last, her voice steady, unhurried, and clear enough to slice through the chaos like a blade. "Mr. Trump," she began, each syllable measured. "It's fascinating that a man who has filed for bankruptcy 6 times thinks he can lecture anyone on business. The truth is, the only thing you've built consistently are excuses." The room erupted. A ripple of laughter surged through the audience, punctuated by sharp applause. The moderators froze, caught between the need for neutrality and the magnetic pull of the moment. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, zooming in on Trump's face, and there it was. The first flicker of unease. Crockett didn't pause for long. She pressed forward with the precision of a seasoned trial lawyer. "You talk about strength, about leadership, but strength isn't shouting over people or calling women names. Strength is standing up for those without a voice. And leadership." She let the word linger, her gaze unblinking. Leadership is telling the truth, even when it's inconvenient. The contrast was stunning. Trump, flushed and fidgeting, versus Crockett.com and composed. Her words, crisp as glass. The audience leaned in, hungry now, knowing they were witnessing something different, not just a comeback, but a reckoning. Then came the wit, sharp enough to draw blood. "You say I don't understand America," Crockett continued, her tone unwavering. "But maybe that's because I didn't inherit millions from my father. I actually had to work for what I've got. I had to earn every step, and you know what? That's what most Americans understand. That's the America you've forgotten." Gasps, followed by another round of applause. Some in the audience even stood, clapping with the kind of urgency that turns a debate hall into a rally. Trump's eyes darted, his lips pursed, searching for a retort. But Crockett gave him no space. Her rhythm was surgical. Fact, dignity, wit, each line landing harder than the last. "You belittle women because you can't debate them. You can insult black leaders because you're threatened by them. And you call critics weak because you're terrified people will see how fragile your own ego really is." The studio burst into a mix of cheers and applause, and for the first time that night, Trump's shoulders slumped. The swagger faltered. He attempted to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow, swallowed by the rising tide of Crockett's momentum. Pressed the advantage. "I've seen men like you in courtrooms, Mr. Trump, loud, arrogant, convinced they can bully their way out of accountability. But in the end, they always face the same truth. Facts don't care about volume, and justice doesn't bow to ego." The moderators glanced at each other, as though they too understood the weight of the moment. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was a dismantling, and Crockett wasn't done. "You parade as a man of the people," she said, her tone sharpening. "But when workers were fighting for fair wages, where were you? Outsourcing. When veterans were waiting for care, where were you? Golfing. When a pandemic devastated families, where were you? Standing at podiums talking about ratings." The words landed like body blows, each one drawing murmurs of agreement, some gasps, and even audible shouts of, "That's right." From the audience, Trump shifted in his chair, his mouth opening, then closing, as though unsure which defense to even attempt. Then came the line that sealed it, the cinematic strike. The one destined to replay across headlines and social media for days to come. Crockett locked eyes with him, her voice dropping just enough to force the room into silence. "You say you made America great. But the truth is, America made you, and it's tired of cleaning up after you." The crowd erupted, a roar of applause, whistles, and standing ovations. Even some of the moderators couldn't hide their reactions. Their eyebrows raised, their lips twitching toward suppressed smiles. Cameras swung across the audience, catching people with hands clasped over their mouths, others shaking their heads. In disbelief at what they'd just heard, Trump's reaction was equally cinematic. The shake of his head, the forced grin, the tightening jaw. He reached for the microphone, fumbling with words, but they didn't come fast enough. Crockett had stolen the stage, and no bluster could reclaim it. She ended not with anger, but with dignity, her tone softening just enough to underscore the contrast. "I'm not here to trade insults. I'm here to remind Americans that leadership is service, not self-promotion. And if that's too hard for you to understand, maybe that's why you lost touch with the very people you claim to represent." The applause built into a wave, rolling through the studio like thunder, lifting her words higher. The energy shifted so dramatically that even the staunchest of Trump's supporters looked shaken, some staring at their shoes, others folding their arms tightly, as if bracing against a storm. Trump's confidence, once unshakable, cracked in full view. His usual rhythm of interruption and dominance had faltered. He leaned back, trying to mask his discomfort with a smirk, but his silence betrayed him. For once, the master of spectacle had been outperformed, his showmanship eclipsed by substance, his bluster silenced by truth. The cameras captured it all, the look in Crockett's eyes, fierce yet steady, the crowd rising to its feet, the unmistakable aura of a turning point. Commentators would later call it the mic drop moment. The instant the balance of the debate shifted, the night's narrative rewritten in real time. And indeed, it was more than just a sharp comeback. It was the cinematic reversal, the rare, political moment when power itself seemed to change hands before the eyes of millions. The storm Trump had unleashed had swallowed the stage, but Crockett.com/sharp, undeniable had turned it back on him. The instant Crockett's final words echoed into silence, the studio erupted. Cheers and applause drowned out Trump's attempted rebuttal. But the real explosion was happening far beyond that stage. Within seconds, clips of the exchange hit social media, ripped and reposted by viewers who couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. On Twitter, a single phrase trended within minutes. #Crockett, Clapback. By the hour's end, it had amassed millions of mentions. Side-by-side videos emerged, replaying Trump's insult and Crockett's devastating reply, often accompanied by captions like, "This is how you handle a bully, and she just made history." TikTok stitched the moment into everything from lip-sync reenactments to slow-motion edits, set against dramatic music. One viral clip showed Crockett's line, "America made you, and it's tired of cleaning up after you," set to the sound of a mic drop, garnering tens of millions of views overnight. Instagram Reels turned her calm delivery into motivational content, spliced with quotes about dignity and resilience. Late-night comedians seized on it, replaying the footage with laughter and disbelief. One remarked, "That wasn't just a debate moment, that was a roast at the scale of the Republic." Another joked, "Trump's ego hasn't taken a hit this big since the 2020 election results." The laughter was contagious, but beneath the comedy was the undeniable recognition. Something had shifted. Cable news devoted entire segments to the exchange. On progressive networks, anchors described it as the moment Trump lost control of the narrative. Commentators marveled at Crockett's composure, contrasting her steady cadence with Trump's bluster. Even more centrist voices admitted that Crockett had landed a blow that would be remembered long after the debate cycle ended. Republican-aligned commentators scrambled. Some insisted Trump had been ambushed. Others argued he was holding back or choosing not to engage, though the clips themselves told a different story. The visual evidence Trump's visible discomfort, the audience's roaring approval, made spin nearly impossible. Even among his base, there was unease. On forums once filled with unwavering loyalty, threads began appearing with titles like, "Not his best night, and she actually got him." Meanwhile, Crockett's supporters surged. Donations to her campaign spiked, reported in real time by her staff, who tweeted screenshots of small dollar contributions pouring in with messages like, "For the clapback of the century," and finally, someone stood up to him without fear. Volunteers signed up in droves, citing the debate as their inspiration. But perhaps the most telling impact was the ripple through everyday conversations. At coffee shops, workplaces, and family dinner tables, people replayed the moment on their phones, heads shaking in disbelief, laughter spilling out. For some, it was validation proof that arrogance could be met with dignity, that bullies could be disarmed without stooping to their level. For others, it was simply unforgettable. Entertainment, politics, crossing into the realm of cultural event. Journalists began writing op-eds framing the moment as a turning point, not just for the debate, but for the broader political climate. One headline read, "The night Trump met his match." Another called it, "The clapback heard around the world." International media picked it up too, replaying the clip as evidence of America's evolving political stage, a sign that voices once dismissed could now seize the center. Trump himself attempted damage control. He logged onto his social platform, posting a flurry of messages dismissing Crockett as nasty and irrelevant, but each post only fueled more mockery. Screenshots of his rants were paired with Crockett's.com expression, the contrast impossible to ignore. For every insult he lobbed, another meme appeared, reinforcing the narrative that he'd been undone by his own tactics. By the next morning, pollsters reported subtle but notable shifts in perception. Viewers who had been undecided described Crockett as the most memorable and the most composed. Focus groups repeated her lines word for word, proof that her words had lodged themselves into the public imagination. For Trump, the reviews were harsher, angry, unhinged, flustered. The showman had lost his spotlight, yet even as the internet reveled in memes and comedy shows leaned into the spectacle, something deeper stirred. Because beyond the laughter, beyond the trending hashtags, beyond the viral clips, the moment tapped into a broader hunger, the desire to see dignity triumph over arrogance, truth stand tall against intimidation. It was about more than a debate. The roar of applause eventually faded, but the resonance of Crockett's words lingered, like a bell tolling long after the strike. What unfolded on that debate stage was not merely a clash between two political figures. It was the embodiment of something deeper, something Americans had long yearned to see. Dignity, refusing to bow before arrogance. Crockett could have met insult with insult. She could have mirrored Trump's volume, his sneers, his theatrics. But she didn't. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She reframed the entire exchange. She took his attempt at belittlement and turned it into a universal truth, one that transcended party lines and spoke directly to the soul of the country. That strength is not found in mockery, but in composure. That leadership is not measured by bluster, but by respect. Inner calm defiance. Crockett echoed the struggles of countless Americans who have endured ridicule, dismissal, or discrimination simply because of who they are. Her words weren't just a rebuttal to Trump. They were a voice for women told to stay quiet. For people of color, underestimated in rooms of power. For anyone who has ever been made to feel small in the presence of arrogance. And that's why the moment mattered so profoundly. It wasn't just a soundbite, it was representation. Live on national television, it was a reminder that identity, race, gender, heritage is not a weakness to be mocked, but a source of resilience, strength, and wisdom. Crockett embodied the truth that dignity, when wielded with precision, can silence even the loudest. Of bullies, commentators would later say she won the exchange. But it was more than winning. Crockett transformed the insult into an affirmation of values that cut across political divides: respect for others, the power of truth, the demand for accountability. Her words carried weight because they weren't just clever, they were grounded in lived reality, in the kind of authenticity that can't be manufactured. In that sense, the clash became something larger than politics. It became a mirror, reflecting the choice facing the nation. Do we reward arrogance, or do we uplift dignity? Do we settle for spectacle, or do we demand substance? Crockett's response drew a clear line in the sand, and millions of Americans felt, perhaps for the first time in years, that someone had spoken directly for them. Her delivery also served as a lesson in leadership, not the kind plastered across campaign slogans, but real leadership, the kind that stays steady under fire, that refuses to descend into pettiness, that recognizes the responsibility of representing something bigger than oneself. In an era where politics often feels like theater, Crockett reminded the audience that integrity still matters, and that courage still inspires. The viral memes and hashtags may have carried the moment into the culture, but the lasting impact was quieter, deeper. It was in the child who watched with wide eyes and thought, maybe I can stand up to people like that someday. It was in the immigrant family who saw in Crockett's words a defense of their own place in America. It was in every person who had ever been underestimated, watching someone refuse to be diminished. And so, while the debate would continue, the outcome of that exchange was already sealed. The crowd had felt it. The country had felt it. What Trump had intended as an insult became a stage for something transcendent, a reminder of what America could be at its best.